Have you ever had your own parents skip the single biggest achievement of your life, then call the police on you 3 weeks later because you refused to give them money? Mine did both. My name is Maya Whitfield. I'm 27 years old, and 11 months ago, I completed a doctoral program that took me 6 brutal years to finish. My parents didn't show up. They didn't warn me. They didn't call before or during the ceremony. Then, 3 weeks later, my father contacted me, not to apologize, but to ask for $2,100. When I said no, my mother called the police and accused me of something I had never done. What happened after that call is the reason I'm telling you this story tonight. Let me take you back to the beginning, because you need to understand the years leading up to that day to understand why it broke something in me that still hasn't fully healed. I was the first person in my family to finish college, let alone a doctorate. My parents, Denise and Robert Whitfield, run a small but reasonably successful HVAC business outside Columbus, Ohio, and growing up, the unspoken rule in our house was simple. My older brother Tyler was the future of that business, and I was, in my mother's words, the one who'd figure herself out eventually. Tyler wasn't cruel to me, not really. He was just the son our household orbited, the way some firstborn sons in certain families simply are, without anyone ever having to say it out loud. I remember being 11 years old, bringing home a certificate for a regional spelling bee I'd placed second in out of nearly 200 students. My mother glanced at it for maybe 3 seconds before setting it on the kitchen counter, where it stayed under a stack of mail for 2 weeks until I quietly moved it myself. That same year, Tyler made the junior varsity baseball team as a freshman, and my parents rearranged an entire weekend, canceled a standing dinner with my aunt to attend his first scrimmage, which, as it turned out, he didn't even play in, spending the whole game on the bench. Nobody seemed to mind. It was the gesture that counted with Tyler. With me, even the accomplishment itself barely registered. When Tyler dropped out of community college after 1 semester to work full-time at the shop, my parents threw him a small celebration dinner, framed it as him finding his path early. When I got my undergraduate acceptance letter to Ohio State with a partial academic scholarship, I found out later that my mother's exact words to her sister were, "I guess Maya's going to go be smart somewhere else for a while." Not proud, not excited. Just slightly bewildered, like I'd announced I was moving to another planet. College itself became its own quiet education in who was allowed to struggle in my family and who wasn't. During my sophomore year, I called home in tears after a professor tore apart a paper I'd spent 3 weeks on, the kind of ordinary academic setback every student experiences at some point. My mother's response was, "Well, maybe that program isn't for you if it's this hard." When Tyler, that same year, got into a minor dispute with a supplier that cost the shop about $4,000 in a bad parts order, my father spent an entire Sunday afternoon on the phone coaching him through how to handle it, ending the call by telling him he was proud of how he'd managed a tough situation. The message, delivered consistently enough over enough years, becomes impossible not to absorb. Struggle was evidence I didn't belong, for me, and evidence of growth for him. I paid my way through the rest of my tuition working 2 jobs, a campus coffee shop during the semester and a warehouse during summers, while also carrying a course load that regularly left me sleeping 4 hours a night. Nobody in my family ever asked how I managed it. When I got into a fully funded doctoral program in clinical psychology 2 years later, my father's response, delivered over Thanksgiving dinner while carving a turkey, was, "So you're gonna be in school your whole life then." Tyler, by contrast, got a brand new truck for his 25th birthday that same year, financed in part by my parents. I want to be clear about something, because I know how this can sound. I don't hate my parents. I don't think they're monsters. I think they are, in a very ordinary and very human way, people who invested emotionally in the child who reflected the life they understood and slowly disengaged from the one who didn't. That's not always a decision people make consciously, but the effect on the person living through it is the same either way. For 6 years, I built a life almost entirely without them. I found mentors in my doctoral program who celebrated my small wins in ways my own parents never had. I found friends who remembered the dates of my dissertation defense before I even mentioned them twice. And through all of it, I kept inviting my parents into my life anyway, because some part of me kept hoping that the next milestone would be the one that finally registered with them. My graduation was scheduled for a Saturday in late May at 10 a.m. at the university's main auditorium. I sent my parents a formal invitation 6 weeks in advance, the kind the university provides, with my name embossed in gold lettering. I called my mother 2 weeks before to confirm they were coming. She said, "Of course, honey, we wouldn't miss it," in the slightly distracted tone she used for most conversations with me by that point. I called again 4 days before. Same answer. I even offered to pay for their hotel room, since the ceremony started early and they lived 90 minutes away. My mother declined, said they'd just drive up that morning. They never left Columbus. I stood in that auditorium in my full doctoral regalia, scanning the crowd during the processional, the way I imagine every graduate does at least once, looking for the specific faces that matter most. I found my mentor, Dr. Patricia Alonz, 3 rows from the front, tears already in her eyes before I'd even walked halfway down the aisle. I found my 2 closest friends from the program, Jasmine and Dev, holding up a small handmade sign with my name on it. I did not find my parents. I did not find Tyler. I did not find a single person who shared my last name in that entire auditorium. I finished the ceremony. I smiled in photos with Jasmine and Dev afterward. I drove myself home to my small apartment that evening, sat on my couch still half in my graduation gown, and I did not cry, not right away. I think I was too stunned to cry. I just sat there, running through every phone call, every confirmation, every conversation over the previous 6 weeks, trying to find the moment where I'd misunderstood something. I hadn't. At 8:47 that night, my mother texted. Not a call, a text. It read, "Congrats on graduating. So proud of you. Tyler had a work emergency and your dad didn't want me driving alone that far. Sorry we missed it. We'll celebrate soon." A work emergency. On a Saturday. At a small residential HVAC company that, as far as I knew, rarely handled weekend calls unless a customer's heating or air conditioning system had completely failed. I didn't respond that night. I didn't respond the next day either. I told myself I needed time to cool down before I said something I couldn't take back. What I didn't fully admit to myself yet was that some quieter, colder part of me had already started keeping score in a way I'd never allowed myself to before. 3 weeks passed. I went back to work, started my postdoctoral fellowship, tried to let the whole thing settle into the same drawer where I'd filed every other small disappointment over the years. Then, on a Tuesday evening, my phone rang. My father. "Maya, hey, listen," he said, skipping past any acknowledgement of the previous 3 weeks entirely. "I need a favor. We're a little short this month on the shop's supplier payment, and I was hoping you could help us out. $2,100, just to cover us till the Simmons job pays out next week." I sat with the phone against my ear for a long moment, genuinely unsure I'd heard him correctly. "You want me to lend you $2,100? Just till next week," he said, like this was a completely unremarkable request between 2 people with a completely unremarkable relationship. "You're doing good for yourself now, right? With the doctor thing." The doctor thing. 6 years of my life, reduced to 2 dismissive words, deployed at the exact moment it became financially convenient to remember I existed. "Dad," I said carefully, "you and Mom didn't come to my graduation 3 weeks ago." A pause. "I know, honey, and we felt terrible about that. Tyler's emergency, really." "I need you to actually hear what I'm about to say," I said, and I could hear my own voice shaking slightly, though whether from anger or something closer to grief, I genuinely couldn't tell you even now. "I'm not going to give you that money." The line went quiet in a different way this time. "Excuse me. I've paid for my own education, my own apartment, my own everything for 6 years without $1 of help from you or Mom, and I never once asked either of you for anything in return. But I'm not going to hand over $2,100 to the same people who couldn't drive 90 minutes to watch me graduate." That is incredibly selfish, Maya. His voice had shifted now, harder. Family helps family. This is exactly the kind of attitude that... I have to go, Dad. I hung up before he could finish the sentence, my hands shaking in a way I hadn't experienced since my dissertation defense. I want to pause the story here for just a moment, because I know some of you have lived some version of this exact call. Being asked for something the moment you finally became useful, right after being invisible when it actually mattered. If that's you, type, "I understand" in the comments, because I promise you, I understand it more than you know. Now, back to the story, because what happened 48 hours later is the part nobody in my family saw coming, myself included. 2 days after that phone call, on a Thursday afternoon, I was in the middle of a clinical supervision meeting at the fellowship clinic where I work when my phone buzzed with a call from a number I didn't recognize, area code local to my parents' town. I let it go to voicemail. 10 minutes later, it buzzed again. Same number. I stepped out of the meeting and answered. "Is this Maya Whitfield?" The voice was official, measured. "Yes, who's calling?" "This is Officer Daniel Reyes with the Fairview Township Police Department. We received a report today alleging that you may have engaged in identity theft and unauthorized use of a family member's financial accounts. I need to ask you a few questions." I actually laughed, a short, disbelieving sound, before I realized how serious his tone was. "I'm sorry, what?" Officer Reyes explained, patiently and without much emotional inflection, that a woman named Denise Whitfield had filed a report that morning alleging that her daughter had, over the previous year, made unauthorized charges on a joint account and refused to return the funds when confronted. My mother had specifically mentioned a figure: $2,100. I sat down on the concrete steps outside my clinic, my heart doing something strange and hollow in my chest, and I explained as calmly as I could manage that there was no joint account, that I had never had access to my parents' finances in my adult life, and that the actual sequence of events was the reverse of what had been reported. Officer Reyes, to his credit, asked careful questions. He asked whether I had records showing that my finances and bank accounts were separate from my parents. I told him I could provide recent bank statements, pay stubs, tax records, and documentation of my independently earned income. He also asked whether there had ever been any loans, shared accounts, or regular transfers between us. I told him there hadn't been, only 3 gifts I had sent my parents over the years, all of which I could document. "Ms. Whitfield," he said eventually, and I could hear something shift slightly in his voice, "I want to be straightforward with you. Based on what you're describing, and given that your mother wasn't able to provide any documentation of this joint account when I asked her directly on the phone this morning, this may not develop into anything further. But I do need to file this properly, and I'd appreciate you sending over what you mentioned." I sent Officer Reyes the records he requested that same evening: recent bank statements, pay stubs, tax documents, and documentation of the 3 gifts I had sent my parents. Everything was organized, labeled, and time-stamped. I have never in my life produced a more thorough packet of evidence, and I have written an entire doctoral dissertation. 2 days later, Officer Reyes called again. The report had been closed. No charges, no further action, and, he added somewhat carefully, that my mother had been informed that filing a knowingly false police report was itself a chargeable offense, and that he'd advised her strongly not to do this again. Before we hung up, I asked whether my mother had ever provided anything supporting her allegation. Officer Reyes paused before answering. "She became upset when I asked for account statements or records connecting you to the account," he said. "She didn't provide any." He explained that without evidence of an account, an unauthorized transaction, or a financial loss, there was nothing further to investigate. I thanked him. I sat with that for a long time afterward. My mother had apparently expected a police officer to accept her accusation without documentation, simply because she was my mother. I sat with that phone call for a long time after it ended. Not relief, exactly. Something colder and clearer than relief. My parents had not simply missed my graduation and made an insensitive request for money 3 weeks later. When I said no, my mother's actual response, her true, unfiltered response, was to try to have me criminally investigated rather than accept being told no by her own daughter. I didn't call either of my parents for the next 9 days. I needed that time to understand what I was actually looking at, because I realized, sitting alone in my apartment with my dissertation still displayed on my bookshelf, that I had spent 27 years quietly building my entire identity around becoming someone impressive enough that my family would finally have to notice me. And I had just discovered that the version of me they actually wanted was one who was either invisible or extractable, with no space in between for a version of me that simply existed and said no. During those 9 days, I told exactly 2 people the full story. My mentor, Dr. Alonso, listened without interrupting, and at the end said only, "You handled that with more grace than most people I've supervised in 20 years would have managed." And my closest friend Jasmine, who had stood in that auditorium holding a handmade sign with my name on it while my actual family sat 90 minutes away, said something that stuck with me longer than almost anything else that month. She said, "Maya, you kept waiting for them to finally see the version of you the rest of us have seen for years. I think some part of you needs to accept they might never fully see it, and that doesn't mean it isn't real." On the 10th day, my father called. I almost didn't answer. I'm still not entirely sure why I did. "Maya," he said, and his voice sounded different this time, smaller somehow, "your mother told me what happened with the police. I didn't know she was going to do that. I want you to know I didn't know." I let the silence sit for a moment before I answered. "Did you know she filed it before or after you found out she didn't have any actual documentation?" He didn't answer that directly. "She's not well, Maya. She's been under a lot of stress with the shop, and I think she panicked when you said no, and I think some part of her genuinely believed." "Dad," I said, cutting him off, gently but firmly, "I need you to actually hear me for a second, the way none of you heard me at my graduation. Or honestly, the way none of you have heard me for more than a decade. I'm not angry that you too are struggling financially. I would have helped you if you'd asked me with any honesty at almost any other point in my life. I'm angry that the only time either of you seem to fully see me is when you need something from me, and that when I finally said no to that pattern, one time in 27 years, the response was to try to have me arrested." He was quiet for a long time, long enough that I checked to see if the call had dropped. "I don't have a good answer for that," he finally said. "I don't think I've had a good answer for a long time. I think I let your mother handle a lot of things about you and Tyler that I should have paid more attention to myself." It wasn't an apology, not fully. But it was the first time in my adult life my father had said anything close to acknowledging the shape of what our family actually was, rather than the shape he preferred to believe it had been. I told him I needed more time before I decided what I wanted our relationship to look like going forward. He said he understood. For the first time in longer than I can remember, I believed that he actually did. It's been almost 10 months since that phone call. I have not spoken to my mother directly since the police report, though I understand, through my father, that she attended one session of family counseling before deciding it wasn't for her. My father and I speak roughly every 3 weeks now. The conversations are careful and still somewhat formal, nothing like closeness yet, but for the first time, they are honest. Tyler reached out once, awkwardly, mostly to ask whether I was doing okay, and I think, in his own limited way, he meant it. I'm now nearing the end of my postdoctoral fellowship and preparing for independent licensure. Most of my supervised clinical work is with young adults navigating complicated family relationships, which is, I recognize, not a coincidence in the slightest. Dr. Alonso, my mentor, likes to joke that I chose the one area of the field that would force me to keep making peace with my own history, one client at a time. She's not wrong. If you're wondering whether I regret refusing that $2,100, or refusing to simply let the police matter quietly disappear without my parents ever having to sit with what actually happened, The answer is no. Not for a single day. My only regret is that it took 27 years and a false police report for me to finally understand that being loved conditionally, only when I'm useful or impressive enough, was never actually love in the first place, just a very convincing imitation of it. If this story hit close to home, let me know in the comments. I read every single one, and I love hearing which part of these stories you connected with most. If you enjoyed this one, hitting that like button genuinely helps this channel grow and reach more people who need to hear stories like this. And if you want more stories about family, betrayal, and women finding their strength, subscribe to Real Stories of Women and turn on notifications, because new stories are posted regularly and you will not want to miss the next one. Thank you so much for spending this time with me tonight. Take care of yourself. You deserve exactly that.